Mr.
I
Speaker.
call the Honourable Craig Foss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very interesting, well, maybe for 30 seconds, the previous speaker, but I just note FEC's report on the budget policy statement, unless I find a minority report in here, actually, I'm sure that member sits on FEC, or one of his party members does. It's a unanimous report from FEC on the budget policy statement. So all what the members just said here, I can't quite see. Perhaps I missed it. Welcome the member to point me to that bit where New Zealand First says they do not support TPP, where New Zealand First says we are not supporting Christchurch, where New Zealand First essentially says they're putting New Zealand last. So I'll come back to that in a minute, Mr. Speaker. But this is a very good report from FEC. It's almost as good as the glory days of FEC 2008 to 2011. They were the days. They were the glory days, and I see the members are working hard to bring themselves up to that awesome level we had not too many years ago. Mr. Speaker, the budget policy statement is part of a series of documents, of papers in and around the financial settings for the government. The BPS that we have here, not to be confused with the Better Public Services, of course, but very strongly linked in here. The budget itself, the half-year update, the full-year update, of course, was the budget, but of course the preview, the pre-election update, which is also one of the very important series of documents in the transparency of the government or taxpayers' accounts across the country. The reason I raise the preview, Mr. Speaker, and the half-year update is the member, Honourable Annette King, earlier seems to be somehow dismissing the validity of some of the numbers that the national members were using in their speeches. So examples such as endless debt going to 60% of GDP, ongoing peaking out of revenue but ongoing almost exponential growth in expenditure. Well, just for those, perhaps some members are forgetting something from a few years ago, or perhaps they're new. Just go have a look, members, at the pre-election update, October 2008. Have a look at that document, or even, which actually makes it more sober reading, the half-year update not long after that. That was a document which described and noted that New Zealand had been in recession, as we all knew, for 1 year prior to the GFC, and of course as the GFC, the rampant inflation, the rampant interest rates caused by prolific spending, out of control ministers and ministries across government resulted in a chaotic economy which National Party did inherit. Now admittedly, yes, that was a good few years ago now, but we're still dealing with the consequences of it. And actually when small businesses talk to me, or we're out there, actually, or even just households, New Zealanders talking about their mortgage. Many mortgages, floating mortgages, are now sub 5%. It doesn't take much to remind them the cost to them, their family, their home, their business of what a 10% plus mortgage was. Devastating cost for their family, for their confidence, for their business. Just imagine, listeners and those watching, if your mortgage suddenly went to about 10%, because that's what it was not that long ago. The policy settings favoured by the opposition still resulted in 10% plus mortgages to you and your family. Another member was talking about GDP growth over the Labor term. I'm not sure if he was talking net, real. I think he was talking gross, because when you got 5% inflation, Mr. Speaker, which we had under the Labor government, and we're in recession or near recession for a good few years, I'm not sure how we'd get to the astronomical figures that he was describing. Mr. Speaker, other members have talked about Christchurch, and Christchurch has been blamed or something. This government does not blame Christchurch for one thing, one iota. This government stands beside Christchurch. We continue to stand beside Christchurch, be it economically, morally, fiscally, and doing all that we can to rebuild that city. Members opposite seem to think, well, because the earthquakes weren't last year, therefore Christchurch, it's all over. Actually, in these documents we are debating, in the BPS, page 6, has a table, net earthquake expenses. Members may be interested in that. The total half-year update net earthquake expenses that this government has stood beside Christchurch is $17 billion. $17 billion. So when members opposite are rattling off notional debt numbers, etc., yes, much of that has been borrowed to fund that. That's absolutely right. And go down to Christchurch members opposite and tell them, no, if they were in government, they wouldn't have done the same. Go down and look at those people in Christchurch and tell them they wouldn't have done the same. Mr. Speaker, the half-year update in October 08, which was the last time we could test the opposition's policy settings, was not a pretty picture, nor was it good reading at all. Mr. Speaker, the National Party is the party for jobs. The National Party is the party for growth and our partner parties in government, helping drive better medium long-term prospects for all of New Zealand, regardless of their circumstances, for all of New Zealand. And it's for those reasons we are so supportive and so driving of free trade agreements. It's for those reasons that we stand on the free trade agreements negotiated by governments before us and previous national governments. It's for those reasons we proudly used to have bipartisan support in this House across the two major parties for job-enhancing, growth-enhancing, opportunity-enhancing agreements for New Zealand, the National and Labour. It is so sad for this Parliament, it is so sad for New Zealand's opportunities and prospects that the Labour Party have walked away from that. Doesn't stand any logical test. My colleague Mr. Bishop pointed out the agreement that we just signed the other day for international labour shipping. Right, their argument, Labour's arguments, do not stand any logical test. They do not stand any historic test against, say, the China free trade agreement, which Labour so proudly, and good on them, initiated, signed and was ratified under this government. It does not stand any test in comparison with another agreement, because if we follow their logic through, we'd tear up CER. Are they arguing that? Are they arguing we should tear up other free trade agreements? They seem to be supportive of the European Free Trade Agreement initiative, but not this one. Why? Why? Why has Phil Goff, the only Labour MP, been given a dispensation to come out publicly and say he's a supporter of TPP? Why, when a party that used to call it the Party for Workers, where 40% of jobs in export regions around this country depend directly on exports, why are their members opposite not being given dispensation to say they support their region, they support families in their region, they support jobs in their region, and therefore they will be supporting TPP because they inherently know it's the right thing to do? Those who are in government with the Honourable Helen Clark know it's the right thing to do. That's right. Those that are true to their convictions, are true to what they say, know inherently it's the right thing to do. And I challenge them to come out and actually stand and say why they are unable to support job-enhancing, prospect-enhancing, opportunity-enhancing agreements which once they so proudly stood by with most other parties in this Parliament and supported, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the opposition have recently come out with this thing, the future of work. And I was very interested recently to see someone else had done this quite a long time ago. Mr. Bishop will help me here. Mr. Bruce Beethan, was it 1981, came out with the original future of work. It makes interesting reading. I guess we're now in the future from 1981. Not much of it's really turned out. So Mr. Robinson and his colleagues are busy working out the future of work. Well, perhaps one of their colleagues over there will do a copy and paste job again and just pick up what Mr. Beethan forecast back then. It may be in a different format, perhaps a typewriter. But Mr. Speaker, TPP, political rhetoric aside that some members are doing, protesters aside out there, we all know and expect them to do their usual stuff. They're perfectly entitled to do that. But the moment they get in the way of other people's democratic process, the moment they try to shout down other people who are expressing their democratic desire and opinion, they've lost the debate. And they have lost the debate. So I go back again. I challenge as New Zealanders, as all MPs across New Zealand, particularly those whose areas totally depend on the export prospects of this country, to stand up, to follow the lead of Phil Goff and get a dispensation and be able to say to their people that they truly support jobs and therefore the free trade agreement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.